Hofday, good afternoon, everybody. This public hearing conducted by the Committee on Appropriations and Adjudications will now come to order. Notice of the public hearing was disseminated to all local media outlets via electronic format on Thursday, July the 27th, with a second notice provided on Tuesday, August the 1st. Notice of this hearing was also made known on the Guam Legislature's website. Today we have one bill on the agenda, and it is proposed Substitute Bill 22-34 COR, Committee on Rules by request of Magalahin Guahan, the Governor of Guam, in accordance with the Organic Act, an act making appropriations for the operations of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the Government of Guam for fiscal year ending September 30, 2018, and for fiscal year ending September 30th, 2019, making other appropriations and establishing miscellaneous and administrative provisions. I know that many are wondering why this hearing was called. Under the 34th Guam Legislature Standing Rules, Section 604C3, a secondary hearing may be required for substantively amended or substituted bills. This hearing ensures that that agencies are given the opportunities to submit testimony on the biennial proposal. And there has been quite a number of inquiries as to why are we implementing a biennial budget. This decades-old problem cannot be solved, the budget problem can't be solved in a single year. In 2011, Governor Calvo submitted a two-year proposal to, as he put it, afford this government the opportunity to plan. This budget agrees with the governor that a longer-term view of the government's fiscal realities is necessary. We all need to pitch in to ensure that we sustain our operations with available revenue, which is why I propose that status quo budget for nearly all the agencies. What exactly does the biennial budget do? It reduces, in this one, we reduce the proposed general fund expenses by at least $34 million in FY18 and further limit budget growth in FY 2019. Many of you have been with us for many budget proposals in the past, and we hope to remove gubernatorial politics from the 2019 budget process. Many of you were around when in the 2014 budget we had to add vacancy pools and other things to address things that were being pushed for campaign purposes. And it'll give the government agencies the ability to refocus government efforts on achievements rather than budget battles. All of you, I can see all of the department and agencies spend every day from October the 1st through January the 30th preparing the executive budget request and then preparing for the hearings after that. So we thought that that time would better be spent in monitoring and achieving the goals that your agencies have were meant to and were established for. What does this mean for the agencies? It ensures that all agencies can cover current personnel and operations. It maintains flexibility with a lump sum budget plus the governor's 15% transfer authority, and gives agencies the ability to know that what the FY19 budget landscape is beforehand. This does not preclude the adoption of future amendments, the execution and adoption of a supplemental budget when appropriate, or the need for the legislature to actively monitor GovGuam expenses and revenues. As a final note, if additional revenue comes in and we are incorrect in our budget projection, it can be appropriated at that time. But right now, we think it's better to be fiscally conservative. As one of my staffers put it, under project and over I mean, don't overpromise and, oh, I messed that all up. Never mind.
That's okay, we knew you.
We know what it was anyway. So let's proceed. Mr. Denied? Congressman President Underwood? Mr. Cruz? Mr. Hattori? And Mr. Carlson? They knew to leave you the center seat. And so, maybe if everybody's okay, we'll let the boss speak first. In the old days, before WhatsApp, the way that they used to control the budget hearings was the analyst would sit in the back with an electric buzzer. But now I notice that the phone keeps jumping, and so, Mr. Carlson, if you're here for the administration, why don't we hear from you first?
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker and members of the 34th Guam Legislature, members of the Committee on Appropriations. My name is Lester Carlson, Acting Director of the Bureau of Budget and Management Research. And I'd like to start off with an overview of the written testimony that I provided. Today, Speaker Cruz, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the substitute bill today. I'll dispense with the title as the Speaker has already recited it. The Bureau of Budget and Management Research recognizes and applauds your continued conservatism and fiscal responsibility in both the preparation and presentation of the substitute bill before us today. The Bureau would also like to thank and acknowledge the efforts of the Office of Finance and Budget in the preparation of the substitute bill. Mr. Speaker, the Bureau shares your optimism for Guam's continued economic growth as evidenced by the projection of increased general fund revenues in fiscal 18 contained in substitute bill number 22-34. We believe that there's certainly room for discussion, agreement, and improvements to the general fund revenue estimates contained in substitute bill number 2234, which will provide the necessary resources to fund continued improvements in public health, safety, and education. We hope that today's public hearing is the beginning of a dialogue between all stakeholders involved. We are committed to working with your committee and the Office of Finance and Budget to fashion a budget we can all agree funds necessary government services. Over the past week, from the time your committee's proposal was released, we have undertaken efforts to review the substitute bill. We would like to approach this two-year budgeting process proposal sequentially, beginning with obtaining consensus with the establishment of the appropriate funding levels for fiscal 18 before we forge into fiscal 19. In this regard, we would like to provide our initial comments relating to the bill as compared with the executive budget request submitted to the legislature in January of this year. I'd like to begin with just some brief comments on the revenues and then move on to appropriations. As far as revenues are concerned, again, I'd like to reiterate the fact that we believe an upward adjustment in the general fund revenues contained in the substitute bill is warranted, and would like to begin discussions to address this matter in the days to come with yourself, members of the legislature, and your committee. The substitute bill proposes to adopt a Section 2718 revenue level of $5.2 million in fiscal 18. And we'd like to point out for the record that in this current fiscal year, the amount of $5 million was appropriated. However, actual revenue collections are only $1 million as of July in 2017. The substitute bill also makes additional appropriations of approximately $5.8 million from 7 special revenue funds, including the Banking and Insurance Enforcement Fund, Health Professional Licensing Office Revolving Fund, Office of Vital Statistics Revolving Fund, Pesticide Management Fund, Police Patrol and Equipment Revolving Fund, the Recycling Revolving Fund, and a Limited Gaming Fund. We would like to note for the record that these funds are currently continuously appropriated to specific activities, and that the appropriation of these funds is unprecedented in recent years. I've been made aware very recently after discussing some of the further details with other department agency heads and my staff that there may be some changes to some of the areas in which these revolving funds may be focused on. I think you're going to be hearing more of those comments, as I will deem everything that we're providing here today as comments from other agency heads that are here today. As far as appropriations, we have several comments to make. For the Department of Education, we note that there was a lack of funding for the principals fund of about $1 million. We note that for the University of Guam, with the existing USDA loan, that the current agreement with the USDA is for $500,000 to be appropriated to the Capital Improvement Fund from the Guam Highway Fund. And we note that there's a difference in the funding source. And again, the comment really is that that might be okay, but I think we certainly need to get USDA's consensus. After all, there is a contractual arrangement in place. Public health, the substitute bill proposes to cut approximately $1 million in Healthy Future funds that were identified in the governor's executive budget bill to fund 23 vacant funded positions in various program sections of the Division of Public Health and for the purchase of medical supplies. Chief Cruz is sitting to my left, so I would be remiss if I did not note that the analysis that we provided, that we obtained, it shows a reduction in $2.5 million for the Guam Police Department in fiscal 18. And we think that that will result in the inability to fund uniform and non-uniform vacancies and 33 police officer trainees. We'd also like to note that, that we believe that, as written, the substitute bill authorizes the governor to use transfer authority of up to $1.7 million to fund the next police cycle, which, with all due respect, is not an appropriation. It's just giving the governor the ability to pull from other sources. The fire department, our review indicates that there's a shift in personnel funding from the general fund to the tourist attraction fund, and that the proposal would also cut $1 million for 5 vacant critically needed civilian positions and funding for overtime. Additionally, the Department of Corrections, our review has led us to believe that the substitute bill does not fund $2.6 million that was requested for the ongoing consolidated agreement with the Guam Memorial Hospital, and reduces $1.8 million for the food service contract. We note that DOC's FY18 requests included personnel funding for approximately 35 corrections officers that were hired during this fiscal year. The Guam Regional Transit Authority, we see a reduction in $2.3 million in personnel of about $120,000, and proposed contract for the increase of bus services at about $2.2 million. The Department of Chamorro Affairs, there's reduced general fund resources by the tune of about $1.3 million. Of which 1.2 was for the Hagania Restoration and Redevelopment Authority, personnel and operations, and approximately $100,000 to fund 2 vacancies. We also note that there's a split between the HRRA from the Department of Chamorro Affairs, and that there is a further reduction in the request for the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority to the tune of about $1.1 million, which would fund vacant funded positions, contractual services, and other projects pertaining to the redevelopment of Hagåtña. And then finally, the Department of Parks and Recreation, we note that there's an overall reduction of about $1 million in funding for personnel and operations, which would, again, result in the inability to fill vacant funded positions, and then there's no funding for operations. So collectively, insufficient funding for utilities, including power and water, would impact, we believe, park and public pool operations. There is a limited gaming fund appropriation contained in the substitute bill of about $608,000, but it's limited to repair and construction of facilities. And as we understand it, currently can't be used for personnel and general operations. Mr. Speaker, in closing, we believe we can, with a commitment to working together to address stakeholder comments that I'm sure you'll be hearing throughout the rest of the afternoon, arrive at a budget for first for 2018, and that you have our commitment to work with all of the members of the legislature to begin the process of going through what we believe and we can agree to would be an adequate funding level of so that we can then take those resources and allocate them throughout the rest of the government to provide, the very best in services to the people of Guam. And with that, that concludes my comments.
Thank you very much. Just so my colleagues understand and the general public understand, in the budget, we rolled over every department. And in your one comment about the fact that some of those special funds, 7 special funds that were appropriated that hadn't been appropriated in the past, each one of those was appropriated to the agency that was collecting it. If there was a slight increase in the rollover budget of the Guam Police Department, there was an increase of whatever that was in the in the maintenance review, the OVIS collection. That stayed within the police department. We know that they've been using it in the past for other things, and we didn't touch it. We just appropriated it. And the reason we did that was we were seeing that in a lot of these special funds that weren't being appropriated, that there was being transfers out, that it was being utilized, but it was never being appropriated by the legislature. So we were just taking it and appropriating it to the agency that was collecting it. The only one that did not get one and spend it within their agency was the recycling revolving fund. We saw that the recycling revolving fund, if you look at the audit, showed that there was a collection of about 2.9. The 400,000 was given to EPA, or 500,000 for the operation that they needed. But then down towards the bottom of it, transfers out of $2.02 million. No explanation as to what it was for, but there was a 2.02 transfer out. And so we decided that since it was being utilized anyway, let's get it back to where it's supposed to be controlled. We have the purse strings. Yes, you have the bank account, but we have the purse strings, and we're saying this 2.02 will go to this agency and that agency and these other agencies. And that was the reason why those 7 were included, because they had never been previously included in the submittals in any executive budget request, and were not being reported as revenue, but it was being spent without authorization, or at least any word from here. And so that was the reason why. And I'll explain the rollover later. And as to the comment about the UOG 500,000 from the highway fund, I think I've been beaten over the head enough times about the need to use highway funds for highway and to stop utilizing it for the university or for GCC. And you know as well as I do that when the money goes into the general fund, it's not marked. It's fungible. And as long as we pay the 500,000, we know that it was in the loan documents, it was guaranteed by the highway fund. But as long as USDA gets its 500,000, it's not going to ask, are you sure this came from the gas station? Because the gas station dollar bills weren't marked HFF funds. In language that I try to explain to people, we may have gotten our initial mortgage at our house from our previous job at GIDA or at the court, and it was guaranteed against that income. The fact that we have a different job now and it's being paid for by our salary from the legislature or from BBMR, as long as the bank gets its monthly payments, it's not going to ask, are you sure this came from the source that you promised it from, or at least that we guaranteed it from 20 years ago? Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to stop the chorus about stop utilizing highway fund. Okay. Yes, it was guaranteed by highway funds, mm-hmm. but it is being paid for by the general fund. And as long as it goes in and it comes out, hopefully the banks will make the payment directly.
Yes.
And we'll go through all the others with okay. you at a later time.
And sir, just to be clear, my comment was that we thought that there just needed to be that prerequisite rapport with USDA, and if they acknowledge that there won't be an issue, then we'll be fine. All we're doing is pointing it out, sir.
Okay. No, I suppose we will, but if they get their check on October the 1st, they're not going to ask and demand that we want to know that it came from the gas station. That's all, just as long as he doesn't call me and say that they're calling him.
Just as long as they don't throw me out of my office.
Anyway, let's continue the hearing, and I'll address them I just wanted to address those two specifically. Mr. DeKnight, you were the first one, and thank you for allowing me to have the administration speak first. I said thank you for allowing me to allow the administration to speak first.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members of the legislature for allowing me to testify on the biennial budget bill. GVB's initial analysis of the bill found that the FY18 TAF was over-appropriated by 44.6 million is the projection, and in our initial analysis we saw that the total appropriations looked like 45.3. So I just wanted to point that out. But overall, the tracking that we presented in our budget request, we had at 43.5 million, and so this budget bill has the TAF at 44.6, so about $1 million more of TAF projected for next year. But GVB is given a rollover budget in this budget bill, and it doesn't account to the resources needed for the Bureau to achieve these lofty goals in TAF projections as far as getting the visitor arrivals to hit these goals. I wanted to state that in our budget presentation, we really highlighted two key areas in our two main markets, Japan and Korea, where we need to put additional resources towards these two pillars of our tourism markets. Number one, Japan. We continue to see decreases in Japan, mainly due to a lack of air seats. We're losing air seats and airlines in Japan, but we have put into several programs to address this by offering more support to airlines to do charter flights, and then also to support new airlines to come in with regular service. But that's why in our budget request we asked for additional funds to fund these programs to incentivize more airlines to fly from Japan, which is the key issue that we're facing in that market. So the rollover budget will not give us those resources to do that. I have some good news to announce. We have been working with HK Express to see if they'll fly from Japan, and they announced that they will fly from Nagoya starting in late October this year. So they'll do 3 times a week from Nagoya as a direct result of our air service support plan, which we put in our budget for next year, which would not be funded under the current budget. So what we would have to do is take those, the funding from other marketing programs in Japan and to be able to put it towards the airline incentive programs that we've been doing, which will mean, though, that will create the supply, but we need the money to create the demand to fill the planes. So that's one of the areas that we're asking for in Japan. The other one is in Korea. Quite frankly, we've been able to really grow Korea market with a pretty reasonable budget. We spent $2.2 million this year in Korea, but in fact, at this level of over 600,000 arrivals from Korea, we've already used the whole budget for this year, so we're just kind of cruising into the rest of the fiscal year until we get more budget for next year, because the $2.2 million is just not enough to sustain all the activities we need to do to maintain a 600,000 plus market and growing. We have a 6th Korean airline starting Air Seoul in September, and we really had to pull back on the marketing and promotion of this new flight because of a lack of budget. And things are going great, and it's great, but when you hit a certain level, you need to support those flights, and keep all those 6 airlines full, or else someone will fall to the wayside and we'll start losing seats in Korea. The other thing that we wouldn't be able to do with a rollover budget is a lot of the visitor safety and satisfaction projects. So this body had authorized the Korean Concierge Pilot Program last year with an additional funding. So we put that continuation of that program and expanding it to not just cover Koreans, but all visitors, because we're getting more FIT visitors to Guam. So those are free independent travelers coming on their own. And so a lot of the times, if they are run into some problems, like remember the mother who was robbed at Two Lovers Point, they have no one to turn to. So the Korean Concierge Program took care of everything for her and her daughter, and is also helping with the translation and is the power of attorney for the prosecution for that case. So that program would, with a rollover budget, that program would not be funded and would go away. We have our VSO program. We've been having a lot of great success with that program. We've even expanded to offering some lifeguarding services, as DPR is having trouble providing all the lifeguarding services down in Tumon. And so we wouldn't be able to expand that program as we plan for next year. Also, with this past year, we had a rollover budget in our what's called our destination maintenance budget. And this is the budget that covers things like island-wide road maintenance. We also do beach cleaning, and we do all the Tumon hardscape and landscaping out of that budget. And so last year we had a rollover of just a little over $1 million. The previous year we had 1.2 million. And so we actually had a decrease this year of about 200,000 in that budget, and we had to cut several routes. So we stopped cutting the grass, like on Route 8 and so forth. And so with this rollover at the 1.08 level, that'll put further pressure on our ability to do these island beautification projects that are done under that budget. And then the last thing I'd just like to mention, Senators, is we asked for a modest increase of $200,000 to our admin budget to fund increased personnel costs due to the annual increments and retiree payments. and other things like trainings and just building general maintenance of the building. So if that is not received, we wouldn't be able to fund those critical admin functions. So I just want to thank the Speaker and the Legislature for allowing me to testify on these critical areas for the Bureau, and ask that, we understand that the resources are tight, but it's critical that GVB receive these resources to market our destination and bring the visitors here to hit the projections that are promised in this budget, or else we won't be able to fund all the other things that the TAF is funding. So I think, we really, from our feeling, is we need to prioritize tourist attraction funding through the TAF and get those visitors here and make sure that the TAF is strong so that can fund all these things. But without that, and we come up short, if we don't have the resources to do our job, then we won't have the funding needed to that the TAF is appropriated for. Thank you.
Thank you. Are those all delineated with a corresponding cost that you'd like us to?
Yep, Speaker, I'll submit a written testimony with hard numbers for the body to review.
Okay, and I'm not sure, but our office did a tracking, and I think it was in tracking with the reports that were coming out of the administration. The TAF is tracking right now at 44.2. That's the tracking.
Yeah, I'm looking at Lester, and that's what he
And
has
so
too, yeah.
our increase by 400,000 is barely 1%.
Yeah.
And so it was a very, very, very conservative increase over where we're at. And we felt comfortable that very slight increase, I'm sure they would say 5% would be, but we just stuck it to just 1%. And so it is very conservative, but yeah. we feel comfortable about that.
Yeah. I, like you, also like to under-promise and over-deliver.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. But yeah, in all seriousness, I think we really ask. We do have some serious challenges with, Japan, obviously, and the growth in Korea. We need to feed that. But we have other markets like Taiwan. We lost EVA Air. It's down 40%, and so it's a very competitive destination. We're up against, my team is up against the big boys. Our competitors are Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hawaii, all the Southeast Asian destinations. We have new destinations all the time that we're competing against for the same visitors, and it's a really competitive market. So we humbly ask this bureau, this body, to give us the resources we need to, continue to hit record numbers in visitor arrivals.
And if you can get that to us like tomorrow.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
We'll look at some of the numbers about what we can assist in, and specifically, how much did you need for your air service support fund?
Yeah, so the numbers I had was for administration. Our request this year was 3,850,000. This year we had 3,600,000. So that's the 250 increase. For marketing, we had asked for about roughly over $3 million increase in marketing. I think with $2 million in extra marketing, we could put that towards Japan and Korea. That would be able to sustain those two markets. And then the other two areas were visitor safety and satisfaction. We asked for 1.4 million. Last year we had 888,000. So I think with an extra 500,000 in visitor safety and satisfaction, we can fund this concierge program and the VSOs. And the last one was destination maintenance. Obviously, I think even 200,000 increase there from the 1.085 number to what we had in FY 2016, 1.2 would be the minimum we need to at least keep the services we're providing today and not decrease them more. So I'll provide a detailed breakdown of those numbers. And
thank you very much, and please thank the the board and all of the employees for being so cooperative
Yeah,
and being reasonable in your requests.
Yeah.
Thank you. Everybody will ask questions in a minute. Let me start with, next in line is the chief. Oh, wait, no, the president, I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the body. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you to speak on the two-year budget. I know it's a rollover budget. I wish you would just roll it over one more time, and then maybe we could get a little bit more. You know, this represents, for us, of course, a bit of a disappointment, but I want to state, I think without fear of contradiction, at least from the university side, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to bring clarity to this process. This is the clarity and stability is the surest way to be able to plan for the future. And if we don't have that kind of clarity and stability and regularity in how we are financed from the government of Guam, it's difficult to plan that because we have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what we're going to do and how much money we're going to get from whatever source. So as always, even though I would say that we are disappointed in the rollover concept, we certainly appreciate it, and our greatest concern continues to be that we actually get the budgeted amount. That is the quintessential issue that we face. You know, I have had the opportunity, of course, to talk with many other university leaders, for example, Cal State or University Hawaii system, where they've experienced cuts from the legislature in terms of their overall budget. But what they have that we don't have is that when the legislature says you're going to get this amount of money, come that first quarter, that's the amount of money you're going to get. And then come the second quarter, that's the amount. So that the squabbling over the amount of money that you're going to get is vested in the legislative and the appropriation process. We don't have that. And so our concern continues to be the lack of concern about the allotment process. So, you know, we're on a good relationship with the Department of Administration these past few weeks, so it's not that I'm complaining about them, but I'm complaining about the overall process. Now, I noticed that in this budget bill, you took out the continuing appropriation. Of course, we would prefer that you put back the continuing appropriation. In a way, it's like a security blanket, and sometimes that security blanket is more emotional than real, and we recognize that. I say that with all sincerity, but on the other hand, we need to kind of envision a process whereby we can guarantee that in the release of allotments, there's relative parity across the different agencies. You know, in the budget hearing that we had here at the university, the question, I think Senator Espaldon made a good point. We don't know what's in store for us. We don't know where we're going. We don't know the future. Well, we don't know, and it's certainly it's uncertain. But we do know that the process that we should have in place is that if there's going to be sacrifice, it's shared sacrifice, that we're all being disadvantaged in the same way, that some agencies shouldn't be disadvantaged more than other agencies. And I don't know how you legislatively do that. I'm not in the Guam legislature, but I'm furiously researching the National Council on State Legislatures to look how other state budgets do that, and there may be some allotment measures that they put in place that actually help guide that process. I don't know what they are. I'd be happy to talk about them some more. Hopefully we can resolve that in a kind of a logical way and bring the same clarity to the allotment process that the legislature is trying to bring to the appropriation process. So I appreciate your support, and I appreciate your understanding, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
If you find the language that will do that, we'd be willing to implement it.
Okay.
The only one that we understand right now is we put in there that BBMR is not to hold a reserve on you.
That's right.
And so they sign and release all your funds, or at least but he's not the problem. He releases it, but whether or not the cash is going to be given to you, and I know we already beat up administration the last time.
That's right. So,
And so we won't relitigate that today, but I understand because, and the rollover and the continuing,
appropriation.
If we do that, then they just keep using 18
That's right.
to pay your 17, and they'll use 19 to pay your 18, and you're still not caught up.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to be able to do that. I know that Mr. Carlson has signed all the requisite documents to get it out of his area, but it's the cash.
Yeah. You're absolutely correct, Mr. Speaker, but that allotment process has to be something that, you know, I mean, I understand that the administration and the executive branch has control over that process. They're the ones monitoring actual revenues. They have certain responsibilities. They should have some flexibility, but that flexibility shouldn't be that some agencies get only 40% of what they ask and another agency get 80% of what they ask. That's the shared sacrifice concept. And if I can find a constitution-proof mechanism for that, you'll be the first to know, and I'm researching.
Thank you. No, and I just want to thank you and President Okada for being such good. I mean, not so much I should thank you for being good sports. I understand that you're
being a good sport
is not you're being left holding the bag, and but at least I want to thank the fact that you have not set your hair on fire and
okay. Well,
you look like me or chief.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate that.
I'm right behind you both.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker and members of the Committee on Adjudication and Appropriation. My name is Joseph Cruz, and I'm the Chief of Police for the Guam Police Department. My comments this afternoon are on behalf of GPD in response to the substitute budget bill. On May 31st, 2017, the Guam Police Department appeared before the Speaker and the Committee on Appropriations and Adjudication to provide information on the department's fiscal year 2018 budget proposal. GPD's FY 2018 general fund projections from $36,600,450 in the executive budget request down to $30,035,239 in the substitute budget bill signifies a shortfall in general fund appropriations of $6,565,211 in the upcoming fiscal year. This represents a 17.94% reduction when compared to the executive budget request projections. Now, while we realize that, we also realize that there seems to be a very significant increase in the special funds category with the inclusion of the Guam Highway funds to the amount of $1.5 million, the Police Services Fund to the amount of $1.3 million, the Tourist Attraction Fund, which is the highest increase at $2.7 million, the Police Patrol Vehicle and Equipment Revolving Fund at $283,753, bringing the total to $5,886,544. And that's an increase over $4,077,632. Initially, we asked for $1.8 million. That represents, to us, we see that as a representation of an increase of 225%. The substitute budget bill allocates requirements, and the unpredictable revenue stream of these funding sources does not directly support the intended projections submitted by GPD through the EBR, or the executive budget requests. More importantly, it is that the $4 million increase in the special fund category does not balance the $6.5 million shortfall in the general fund, signifying the sentiment that the GPD programs in FY18 may not be pursued. Fiduciary responsibility required by GPD is to allocate for continued obligations that support operations such as salaries and benefits for our personnel, as well as supplies and materials and contractual services supporting our personnel's needs. These needs are seen in more detail with automated dispatch and crime report development, secured reliable communications, fuel for our patrol cars, and all projections provided in each category of the budget proposal provided in the executive budget request. Pursuant to this substitute budget bill, this now requires a reallocation of special funding into the general fund categories. GPD's redistribution of appropriations in compliance with the substitute budget bill requires certain special funds, such as the Guam Highway Fund, to specifically support operations in our Highway Patrol Division. Salaries and benefits for HPD will now be supported by this special fund. The Tourist Attraction Fund will support salaries, benefits, supplies, and materials for the entire Tumon-Tamuning Precinct Command. Police Services Fund supports administrative services that will be funding the categories of salaries and benefits for our non-sworn personnel, to include contractual services, supplies, equipment, and other capital outlay needs. These same categories in the general fund are receiving all special fund support. Essentially, none of the programs in the special funds, as we projected it in the executive budget request, will be funded by the substitute budget bill. GPD did conduct a horizontal analysis, and the bottom line up front is that from the substitute bill, we see that the Police Services Fund at $1.3 million, the Guam Highway Fund at $1.5 million, and the Tourist Attraction Fund at $2.7 million will all be shifted over to make up for the shortfall of $30 million from the general fund. This leaves an amount of $963,329.73. When taken with the $1.8 million that we initially asked for, which, because all the special funds are being transferred to general funds, we see a total shortfall of $2,772,242. Now, what kind of impact does that have to the Guam Police Department? It means then that for the special funds, civilian positions which are currently under recruitment may not be realized. Positions like a contracted staff psychologist, program coordinators, ones which control over 25 grants and sub-grants, data entry clerks to improve efficiency at our records and ID sections, and law enforcement dispatchers to improve dispatching and response times to calls for service by the general public. Dr. Mary Okada is constructing a DNA laboratory at the Guam Community College for the Guam Police Department. To be able to staff that DNA laboratory, we're looking to hire 3 criminalists, 2 fingerprint examiners, and transition police officer positions from crime scene investigators and ballistic experts to civilian positions. So there are other requirements from the special funds that include supplies, repair equipment, hardware upgrades for the Aegis, as well as the APHIS fingerprint system. There are also services like power, phone, and internet that also come from our special services. On the general fund side, where we saw that shortfall of $963,329.73, the impact to the Guam Police Department is that those POT positions, which I testified before this committee on the 31st of May, are so important. Because with Public Law 33-163, that recruitment process is all hinged on a funding source that will allow the Guam Police Department to continue to recruit into our force. In addition to our police officer trainees, detention facility guards, our positions that we need to fill, as well as the normal attrition rate or resignations and retirements of our police officers. And I bring this to light, ladies and gentlemen, because we were very aggressive in the curtailment of that ugly word or phrase that we call overtime. Overtime, when I first became the chief, was to the tune of about $2.9 million. In FY16, we brought it down to 1.8. In this current FY, we only projected 1.6, and for the next fiscal year, with what we were asking for, we're only looking for 800,000. But that's all hinged on the fact that we get funding, appropriate funding, to be able to recruit, to hire, and be able to promote as well. Because as I said earlier in previous testimonies, the only way to take care of overtime is to recruit into the Guam Police Department and hire on a normal or regular basis. So to that point, again, overtime will continue to be a problem for us should we not receive the appropriate funding levels that we are humbly asking for. So on behalf of the Guam Police Department, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments in response to this budget bill. And again, like Acting Director Carlson said, and the President, as well as Mr. DeKnight, GPD is more than willing to work with this committee, as well as your staff, to appropriately or come to a level where the Guam Police Department is adequately budgeted, all for the purpose of appropriately serving and protecting and maintaining our public safety for the people of Guam. Thank you, and Sidus Masi.
Thank you very much, Chief. And maybe now might be the time that I publicly explain why I felt that it was safe, or at least okay, to have a rollover budget. If I can get the staff to put up on the screen a report that has been mandated by law for 5 or 6 years, and miraculously this year it was actually provided. We hadn't received it for the last 4, but it did come in this year. If you roll it to the top, it's the 9+3 report. 9+3 means either BBMR or Department of Administration has compiled and reported how much was actually spent, what the appropriated level was for your department, and that's under the first column, which is Public Law 33-185. All right? And in the second column, it shows BBMR's tracking at 9+3. So if you roll down to Department of Public Safety, can you roll that down, please, for me? It's about 5 or 6 up. Your appropriation level was $35,438,269. All right? BBMR is reporting and saying the 9+3 that they're expecting that all you'll spend is $34,295,327, leaving $1,142,942 unspent in your current appropriation. This was not my report, gentlemen. This came from the administration on a 9+3. Mr. Carlson?
Yeah. I have Mr. Taiting Fong, who I'd like to get the opportunity to give some clarification, if you don't mind.
My name is Bill Taitingfong. I'm a BMA supervisor at the Bureau of Budget Management Research. I was the one who compiled the 9+3 report. The 9+3 report, which reflects 9 months of actual expenditures from October 1st to June 30th, and 3 months of projected expenditures from July to September. Now, the expenditures are straight out of the AS400 and are basically reflective of only those appropriation accounts that are in Part 4 of Chapter 1, Parts 2, 3, 4 of Chapter 2, Chapter 5, and Chapter 10. These chapters are, the expenditures are based on the appropriation allocation report. Those are the 9+3 expenditures that we detailed. Now, the expenditures does not take into account expenditures for special appropriations to the department. So like in cases of DOC, which has their annual appropriations to the department, it doesn't take into account expenditures like for police officers, if they were appropriated funding from the vacancy cost pool, if they were receiving funding for the recruits under federal grants. So the expenditures are only reflective that's what's in the AS400 for those particular accounts. So there may be more expenditures that are being incurred for each of the agencies that are not actually reflected on the 9+3 reports.
But you do report that there are amounts that in every department you did a 9+3, right?
That's correct.
And did you add up all of them and try to figure out how much was not going to be spent at the end of the year?
That's correct. If they were in requisitions or purchase orders, most of those are encumbered but may not have yet been paid. So we project those that are in those encumbrances to be spent on the last 3 months.
And so that's what we did. We went to every single one and we saw how much you were reporting for each one. And
most of the expenditures
in our
are
compilation, that's what we showed for coming out of your report.
Right.
And if they show that back up on the screen, it showed that there was going to be about $9,922,000 that hadn't been spent, at least even from your 9+3. And I and my OFB staff were a little weary or leery about your projection for 3. If you'd put up on screen the 9+3 compilation that we have in our report on the budget. The one in our narrative.
What does that show? I can't even see it. Sir, is there a way we can get a hard copy? I really can't even read that.
Yes. I need that page from our report from the dashboard.
Does that show a variance?
Showing our totals about how much was in personnel, or to show why we questioned the 9+3 and how we felt that it was padding.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the hard copy. For the rest of the public who are vision impaired like myself, what is up on the screen actually represents a majority of, if not all of the executive line agencies. And there are 3 columns here and specific, I think we were talking about the Guam Police Department. And if I understand what it is that's being presented here, I look across to the right, I see a $1.1 million BBMR versus our 9+3 variance versus the Budget Act that's currently in place. I know the speaker made reference to $9.9 million, but that's a cumulative total.
Yes, no, for all the agencies.
Yeah, so I was kind of like, I think even the chief looked at me and goes, what, $9 million?
No.
So I think Mr. Tithingphone, you know, again, leery as your OFB staff may be, we are projecting that there will be an increase in expenditure activity just because of the closure of the GSA dates and DOA dates for encumbrances.
And
So, but just to your point, sir, if I may, with the police department, I think that what it is that we're looking at here represents and substantiates what the chief said. I mean, you're looking at a budget approval of $35 million, but yet the substitute bill is less than that, and I think that's the point he's trying to make.
but with all the other funds that are going into it, it adds up to $35 million for the department, or it should. Everybody should have gotten a full rollover.
Okay, and we did some analysis. I don't have it with me right now, but we actually went across and did, as the chief mentioned, a horizontal analysis. And I believe our numbers that were contained in my testimony reflect our analysis, and it's, you know, $2 million short, 2.5.
And it may be that you have released it from your department, but like the university, you didn't hold any reserves, but they're still almost $15 million short in cash.
That wasn't what I meant, sir. I apologize. Our analysis of your substitute bill funding for GPD versus the governor's executive budget request, which I think is the apples-to-apples comparison that we're doing here, we show ISO $2.5 million reduction overall, and he shows 2.7. So there are some inconsistencies that, again,
Okay, well then, I'm glad you pointed that out, because as Nate pointed out, there may have been something else. But my specific instructions was everybody was supposed to get a rollover budget, the same amount that they had this year. And
okay,
because my justification was giving you a rollover budget, you would be getting the addition, your increase would be that $1 million that you didn't spend this year.
yes, and I understand, and for the public, you know, education as well as I think ours here, we're doing a couple different comparisons here, because as the chief mentioned, when GPD came here May 31st, they were advocating for the executive budget request amount with requirements for the cycle and all the other things that he just talked about. You are now talking about the existing level of appropriations that are contained in this fiscal year budget. So there are differences in what it is that we're comparing here. You know, when I look at what it is that you have with respect, and going back to my comments on your continued optimism on you know, the state of Guam's economy. If I take a look at what it is that we have with respect to your substitute bill versus the current budget bill, with respect to general fund revenue available for appropriation, my number is that you are stating that there will be a $7.2 million increase in general fund revenues available for appropriation. So we do have a little bit of a disparity in what it is that we're using for comparison purposes, and hence the idea that this is, you know, it's only been a week since you released this substitute bill. We're all sitting here and just, you know, willing to be able to, like, you know, go through the numbers and go through our spreadsheets and your spreadsheets, and maybe have more clarification on the 9+3 report, so that everybody understands where we're coming from and how we, you know, just a little bit better rapport, all designed to come up with the best possible product. We're committed to doing that, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And yes, we will. And I want to thank you for preparing it, because it's been in statute for at least 6 years, and we finally got the first one today. I mean,
Again, sir, that's my staff. That's not me.
I'm glad
kudos go to the staff.
I'm glad you're getting them to comply with the statute.
You're welcome, sir.
But anyway, we'll address that. And what the point that we're trying to make is, I know that you would have rather had 40, or last year where you told us you needed 45.
Yes, sir.
And you're operating at 34 currently. We just need to have people, how much is actually going to be needed to operate? We've given you your vacancy pool fund that you have dragged on for, what, it's 3 years since the last election.
Yes, sir.
So, okay.
Okay.
We'll discuss it more.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Speaker.
thank you. Who is next? Mr. Hattori?
Okay, Holiday Speaker B.J. Cruz, Oversight Chairwoman and Vice Speaker Terlahi, Senators, members of the Committee on Appropriation and Adjudication. I am really happy to be here. I am the Director of the Public Defender Service Corporation. I've met most of you. What the Public Defender Service Corporation does is we provide legal representation to the indigent population of Guam. Right now, we provide criminal representation. When we presented our budget back in June 23rd, we indicated to you our goal of also providing civil representation in limited matters to those who cannot afford an attorney. When we presented our budget on June 23rd, many of the senators, unfortunately, were not able to be present, so we're glad to be able to appear before you and address you today. Now, while we are disappointed at the status quo budget that we will receive in fiscal year 2018, and then the slight increase that we will receive in 2019, we recognize that Guam is fiscally challenged, and that the legislature really has a tough chore of meeting this challenge. We will do our part in contributing to the government of Guam's continued financial well-being, and we promise to meet whatever challenge you give us without it affecting our indigent clients. When we came before this esteemed body on June 23rd, we identified our organic growth and what we need to survive in fiscal year 2018. Our organic growth alone, without the civil division, was over $200,000. I know that we did submit a 9-3 report, and I just took a look at that, and although our actual numbers this year are going to be less than the budgeted amount, it doesn't account for the fact that we had 3 attorney positions that we need to fill, and we're going to be filling those, 2 in September with attorney ones and a more experienced attorney in October. And so that's why our actual expenditures are less than what was budgeted. If we are actually fully staffed for an entire year, we will suffer. We won't be able to meet the budget, but we'll find a way to do it. But because of, I know that you're basing this on the 9-3 report, we just wanted to explain that over the course of the last year, attorneys, we've had a couple attorneys that have left the office and moved back to the mainland, and so that created some amount of lapsed funds or unused funds, and so that's why our actual expenditures are less than what our budget was actually provided. But we're hoping to be fully staffed in the next, by mid-October, with the attorneys that we're going to be bringing on board. And that would bring us to 16 attorneys. Right now, we have 10 judicial officers that we appear before. There's talk of an 8th judge, so that will make it 11 judicial officers, and that's 16 attorneys appearing before 11 judicial officers. So it's we're pretty tight in terms of our time, but we will meet whatever challenge that we're confronted with. We foresee that this moderate increase that we're going to get in 2019 is about 70,000. That'll be short of what we will need to maintain our staffing levels and the projected increase of benefits. Therefore, we ask that the legislature provide a supplemental budget hearing towards the end of fiscal year 2018 and before 2019 so that we can demonstrate to the legislature that we do need additional funding. I mean, there's great value in having a 2-year budget. It forces management to plan ahead. However, we didn't actually prepare a 2019 budget this year, and so we would appreciate additional time to submit and justify any other increases that we foresee in 2019. For example, we have our computer servers about 10 years old. We might need to request funding for a new system. Hopefully it won't be that expensive, but we'll make do with what we have. So if the legislature does have a supplemental budget hearing, then at that time we could provide the legislature with a status report of our financial posture at that time, and hopefully the government will generate more revenues and we could seek additional funding. When we were here back in June, we indicated our desire to reopen the Civil Division in fiscal year 2018. After seeing that we are going to just get a rollover budget, we've talked about it and we have not abandoned that goal. Given the realities within the biennial budget, PDAC will continue with its track record of doing more with less. We've had several meetings with our team throughout the course of this year, and we know that the indigent community of Guam does need assistance in civil work as well. And we refuse to let the nationwide assault on the indigent population reach our shores. We will prepare to gradually resume legal representation for our indigent population who are challenged, facing issues concerning divorce, custody, visitation, guardianship, and advanced health care directives. Our team stands united in our mission to serve Guam's less fortunate, and we will continue to help those individuals in desperate need of assistance. We know that our ability to do so will be rather limited as we shift some of our resources from criminal to civil matters. But this is a challenge that we are willing to take on, and something is always better than nothing. We are the voice of Guam's indigent population, and we pledge to continue representing them in legal matters to the best of our ability. That being said, it would be an injustice to our constituents if I did not make a last-ditch effort for additional funding. If we are given half of what we are requested for the Civil Division, approximately $150,000, I believe then we can sleep well at night knowing that we helped someone's father, mother, brother, sister, son, or daughter with legal representation they cannot afford, whether it's a criminal or a civil matter. I ask that you keep this request in mind as amendments are made to the biennial budget bill. Senators, thank you for your time. We do not envy your duty to establish priorities. However, we do urge this body to consider assisting the indigent population of Guam by helping us help them so that we can once again fulfill our statutory mandate and represent indigent constituents in civil matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And did we ever get clarification on how it was that the PD's office contributed $1.2 million to the governor's?
I really wish that existed in our account, but it doesn't. It seemed like there was some...
In the audit, maybe the auditors will speak to it.
It had something to
like
do with us receiving the funds for alternate public defender. It was some accounting thing that I don't really understand. All I know is that we did not receive there isn't an extra 1.2 million surplus from fiscal year 2017. Because
in the audit, it shows that the supposed surplus
of one. That's correct.
Most of it is loan related, but there's 1.2 from the Public Defender Service Corporation.
And I know our controller met with the OPA, and I think they resolved that issue. It had something to do with the money that we get for alternate public defender, and so, but it's not. It wasn't a surplus from 2017. Yeah.
I know the OPA is looking at me quizzically, and I'm just My memory's still good.
Oh, yes.
And, and it was PDSC that you guys reported as the 1.2. Because I've jumped them several times, and I'm still trying to figure out how they contributed to the surplus.
I wish we could say that we did contribute to the surplus.
Oh, well, thank you very much, and we'll try to figure out something. All right, thank you very much for making your presentation. And just, if you look at the proposed budget bill on page 89, the summary of the funding for the police department shows 335,921. Page 89. I don't know where we're reading 32, but with all the special funds that we've added up that you didn't want, it comes out to 35. Okay? Let's get the, did anybody, well, they're still here before they run away. Does anybody have any questions of these parts? Anything? No? You? No? Okay. Public auditor. Oh, Mr. Linsagen. And then OPA and DRT, if DRT is still here. Okay. Peter John, you want to come up? Mr. Leon Guerrero? No, gave up. Mr. Lamarina, Senator, please join us. And Mr. Paris from Customs. Were you going to testify? Just come on. Please introduce yourself. And
my name is Sedfree Linsangan. I'm always happy and honored to be here, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm against this biennial budget proposal, Mr. Speaker. While I agree that you have good intention in reforming the budget process, and you and the Governor, Mr. Calvo, for that purpose, but I feel that the reason is too weak to move with the biennial budget proposal. The Governor is saying that we need to plan ahead. And while your position is, because it will be political and be contentious for next year's hearing, what we're dealing here are taxpayers' money that need to be safeguarded and protected. And I would like to read to you a report by Budget and Policy Priorities by Richard Cogan in 2012. Many budget experts have concluded that the disadvantage of biennial budgeting outweigh the advantage and make it unwise course to pursue. For instance, in the testimony in 2004 by the Congressional Budget Director Douglas Holtz-Eakin warned changing to a two-year cycle could have significant drawbacks. It could diminish the effectiveness of congressional control of spending in the appropriation process and could make adjusting to rapidly changing budgetary and economic condition more difficult. I will also read to you some of the highlights on the report. It also may be noted that the majority of states, including nearly all of the largest states, use annual rather than biennial budgeting, and that a number of states abandon biennial budgeting in recent decades because of problems it was causing. Since 1968, 5 times as many states have moved from biennial to annual budgeting as have done the reverse. Substantial change in economic condition also can occur in the intervening period, especially in our island, that are susceptible to typhoon and economic condition. Biennial budgeting would make it harder for the federal government to respond expeditiously to change in such conditions. Biennial budgeting also may hinder broader efforts to reorder federal budget priorities. As this observation about change in needs over a 2-year cycle suggests, biennial budgeting is not likely to work in the real world in the way it appears on paper, because you cannot count the chicks while it's not yet hatched. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, 44 states practiced biennial budgeting in 1940. Now, just 19 states do. The disadvantages of biennial budgeting are likely to outweigh the advantage. The apparent drawbacks are sufficiently serious that if federal policymakers wish to pursue biennial budgeting, the procedure should first be tested on an experimental basis with a limited number of budget accounts. That's why, Mr. Speaker, I believe that we should not pursue this biennial budgeting because the disadvantage outweigh the advantage, especially on your notion that it will be political. We're in the world of politics. Is it the reason that if we cannot lick them, join them? You need to stand your ground, regardless that anybody here is politicking or not. You do what is right. That's how the leader is. You just listen and listen. Maybe 1 out of 100 that I will say will help the island is correct. And then on planning, that's what planning ahead is the main reason of the governor. How about if we don't receive the projection that you are expecting? Then what will happen? There will be a lot of layoffs in the government employees. That's why, Mr. Speaker and my dear senators, what we need to do, I believe, is stop all the capital improvement from all different agencies. We don't need the new administration building from the port or additional building from the judiciary. Only the problem is the parking. We need to live within our means. Will the operation be affected if we only have an old building? If we have the money, then no, that's not a problem. We can go ahead and improve or build a new building. And what I can see is all the agencies are contesting improvements here, improvement there, but they don't have money to build. And they're all getting it from the general fund. And then what will happen? You don't have money to pay the tax. Then you'll go to borrowing again until our government goes bankrupt. Just like what happened in Detroit the retirees have no recourse but to accept the ruling of the judge. Their pension were all reduced. And it likely will happen here because the economic situation right now is not good. And it will continue. As you can see with the military build-up, how long they've been saying that? For the last 10 years. And the money that they are spending there are almost close to what they've been spending for the last 20 years. They have not really made a major significant funds to put in the base. And everything now is changing because right now Japan and Korea needs them. That build-up will never be, will not even materialize. The reason why what they're doing is just protecting their assets. They're building to block the missile. That's it. That's why to make the budget for a 2-year cycle is not good, Mr. Speaker. And what we need to do, I believe, is to think what the added revenue that we can fiscalize to create law. Just like now, maybe there's 174,000 population here in Guam, 174,496. And there's only, 25,000 people voting. And then maybe you can help the election commission to impose filing fee for the candidates. Because in California and other states, that's what they've been doing. For the governor, all they need is only 65 nominating petition. And the governor have to file $3,600. Imagine for 36.9 million population. See? So it helps, it's small only, but it helps the general fund. And it applies to all people running for office, from governor to mayor. And it varies. Like the vice governor, we have to file $2,600 for the filing fee. That's why and we before we even take a look at the budget hearing or process, OPA is very important. We need they need to submit their audit even before the hearing will be started. In fact, my recommendation is strip them of their authority to hold procurement process and instead concentrate on their expertise, which is more important because they'll be dealing with auditing all the agency. And it's an elected independent body. And in fact, as mandated by the Organic Act of Guam, OPA can be abolished. Or it can be created, but it can be abolished, including the office of the public prosecutor's office. But we shouldn't be doing that because their job is so important to make the job easier for every senator to look at all the budget appropriation requests of every agency. Now, we're always talking about check and balance, check and balance. And we all know that the governor is very powerful. Section 1422 of the Organic Act of Guam gave him all the general supervision and control of all the instrumentalities, bureaus, agency of the executive branch of government. He can terminate, he can remove officers unless otherwise provided by the court, by the law of Guam. See, if you remove that defining moment in the senator's role, you're protecting or carrying out your fiduciary duties and responsibility. You just eliminate the check and balance, which always what the lawmaker is saying every time that you are trying to conduct an oversight hearing. And right now, I was very satisfied because right now there's a lot of senators that are really working hard and conducting oversight hearing because it's very important. You know, you need to question why, what, how, why the DOE is always buying books every year. What will happen to the old books? Why we have to make another charter school and we cannot afford it. You know, we already have GCSE. We have the public school. If we have the extra money, maybe it's not the right time, you know, for another charter school because that will be financed again by who? By the general fund again. And then you don't have money again for other money that we have borrowed. You don't have any payment. See, that's my main point. See, you will eliminate your most important fiduciary responsibility as fiscalizer, as senators that will conduct check and balance. That's why yeah, I would like to again thank you for trying to reform this process on budget because I sincerely believe that you have honest intention, and I'm trying to understand you, but I cannot help myself but disagree, Mr. Speaker. And before I go, I just want to recite to you a prayer by Catherine Farmer, if I can still remember it, that God allow me to I cannot give me the peace and serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you very much, my dear senators. I hope I brighten your day. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nsakan. Ms. Hitchner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, Speaker Cruz, committee members, and senators. My name is Yuka Hechanova. I'm the Deputy Public Auditor, and with me today in the back here are the audit supervisors, Rodolin Gerardo and Llewellyn Terlahi. We're here representing the Office of Public Accountability. The public auditor is currently off island, so we're representing the office for her. And thank you, first of all, for letting us provide testimony on Bill 2234. In Bill 22-34, the OPA's appropriation for FY 2018 is identical to our 2017 appropriation of $1.396 million. In our recent report of OPA's 9 months actual plus 3 months expenditure forecast, which we did submit, we projected a $75,000 shortfall for FY 2017, and we plan to cover this shortfall with FY 2016 operational lapses. However, we are concerned that we will have a much larger shortfall in FY 2018 and FY 2019 based on Bill 22-34. FY 2016 provides a good baseline for OPA operational needs because we were able to maintain a staff complement of 15, and we carried the staffing to FY 2017. And this was after we've had many years of turnover and fluctuations in our staffing, and it looked like in FY 2016 we were able to finally maintain a staff of 15 and carry it over into FY 2017. In FY 2016 we expended $1.51 million, and we estimate our expenditures will be similar for FY 2017 at $1.47 million. OPA was granted hiring autonomy this year in January, and we thank the legislature for giving us that autonomy. We recently filled 2 vacancies, and we anticipate maintaining a staff complement of 17 to 18 staff throughout FY 2018 and FY 2019. For FY 2018, we are projecting personnel costs to be $1.3 million for 17 employees. This will only leave $96,000 for operations and a potential shortfall of $290,000. Bill 22-34 also allowed a very modest increase of $28,000 for FY 2019, which will again result in shortfalls, especially if we maintain our current staffing, which we do anticipate we will. So in closing, thank you very much for your time and attention to our testimony today. We really are very proud of the fact that we've been able to maintain our staffing after many years of fluctuations, where maintaining the staff has really translated into doing more audits, getting a lot more work done. If we lose staff again, our productivity is gonna definitely suffer, and we're gonna just be back to rotating staff again, and we're very happy that we're able to hire. We have the autonomy to hire, but now we can't afford to hire. So thank you again for your time and attention.
Will you be providing us with an amount that you believe would be able to sustain both years?
No. We're projecting about 1.5 million looks to be about what we need for about 15 employees. We hired 2 additional that just started this month. So for FY18, we're already going to have a shortfall. But we think that our operational lapses from last year will cover that, but we're concerned about 2018 and 2019. If we maintain the 17 to 18 staff that we have now, which we really want to keep on board.
Okay. Thank you. Peter John, and then Director.
Thank you, sir. Buenas tardes, Senor Speaker and members of the committee. My name is Peter John Camacho, Hospital Administrator, CEO of the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. I am here to testify on Bill 22-34, biennial appropriations for FY 2018 and FY 2019. Bill 22-34 for 2018 proposes a budgetary appropriation to the GMHA in the amount of $21,286,302. Analysis of the funding, though, shows $15.7 million from the pharmaceutical fund, of which $11.8 million is to be used as a Medicaid match, leaving $3.9 million as the actual subsidy. The reason is that the $11.8 million is actually a local match for reimbursement for services provided to Medicaid patients. The Healthy Futures funding provides approximately $3.3 million, and the general fund provides $2.2 million. The true subsidy then is approximately $9.5 million. When the hospital presented its 2018 budget, we requested a subsidy of approximately $36.3 million. As presented by Bill 22-34, this leaves a shortfall of $26.9 million. The shortfall would manifest in an inability to recruit critically needed staff in medical, nursing, and clinical support areas. We would again be faced with the continuing inability to procure needed capital equipment, and likely having challenges with paying vendors and credit holds, and less than optimal patient outcomes. Although we have advised our managers to think ahead to FY 2019 needs, we have not yet begun those discussions on those anticipated needs, although there is an increase proposed in 2019. As you know, the GMHA has assumed administration of the DOC clinic. Funding does not appear to have been addressed in the DOC budget section, and we respectfully request that review. We respectfully request the Legislature to reconsider the 2018 funding level identified for the Islands Public Safety Net Hospital. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My name is Tony Lamarina, Director of the Department of Corrections. I testify on Bill 22-34. Primarily, Senator, our Speaker and Senators, DOC comes before you today primarily to address the concerns that we have in regards to the proposed funding levels for Substitute Bill 2234. As Peter John earlier stated, a good portion of our increase for this year is for the purposes of funding the clinic at DOC. As many of you are aware, just this year, the consent decree was lifted by the federal courts, primarily because of the work that has been done through this memorandum of understanding between the Department of Corrections and GMH. This obviously will highly put at risk our status with the federal courts. If the clinic is not funded, there is just no way that we could function with the budget as presented. Again, like I stated, the good majority of the increases stated is primarily to cover the cost of Guam Memorial Hospital running the clinic. Also, our food services. Again, unlike any other institutions, we have 700 plus individuals at any given time. Just this week alone, we had 3 committed by the courts to DOC. We forget that individuals, and it's the reason why the consent decree came into play, is the reason I go to court at least once or twice a month, is because those individuals confined at DOC have constitutional rights. When those constitutional rights are violated, the court calls me in to explain why their rights were violated. I was just in court last week because medication was late a couple of times, and we had to explain with GMH, and that was resolved. So, we have to remember that although these individuals are confined and incarcerated, we have to realize that they do have constitutional rights, and we try our utmost to ensure that these are adhered to. So in regards to catering services, from 3.3 million is what we anticipated. With the funding level, we can only allocate about 1.8 million, which would be a shortfall of about 1.4. So again, we've got 700 some bodies in there. And then our contract is up next year in March, and obviously those increase, there's going to be an increase. This current contract that we have, the 3 years is up, and obviously with inflation and the cost of goods, we anticipate even a higher cost in food costs. Some of the programs that we're trying to do to ensure safety, not only for the inmates, but also for our officers and everyone that works at DOC. We recently purchased 100 iConnect radios for the purposes of having communications with every single individual on duty. Funding would not be available to continue those contractual services for our radio services. The other thing too is we currently have 14 inmates housed in off-island prisons, which cost about $501,000. This year's proposed budget, normally we would get this as a miscellaneous appropriation. This year, we're going to have to take it out of our general fund budget, so that we're already short $3.2 million with the Bureau of Prisons at $500,000, and then we also have to contribute about $100,000 to the judicial information system. That will come out again, based on this bill, out of our general fund appropriation, not out of the miscellaneous appropriation. So really our shortfall will then expand to $3.8 million. And senators, unlike my counterpart who was here earlier from the Guam Visitors Bureau, and I was there back in 2010, we don't need to recruit people to come to DOC. We're full. And I know the good speaker is appropriating money to the judicial system for the purpose of electronic devices. But even with that, even if we removed 100 detainees from DOC, it still doesn't lower the number of officers that we'll need. It's like having a classroom. You've got 25 kids, now you've got 20. You still need a teacher. You still pay the same power. You know, the decreases we see probably is in meals and probably some utility costs, but, you know, right now, you know, we've done a great job, I think, in regards to lowering our overtime this year. Since we've brought in the officers, 32 officers in December, we've consistently been able to save 50% in overtime, and a lot of those resources have been used. You know, it's an old facility. Many of you who have been there, we are constantly just patching. I've had to change in the last 4 months 5-ton units because we need to provide air conditioning to the inmates. If not, again, you know, they'll take me to court that their constitutional rights were violated, you know, and that type of thing. So, you know, these are things that we constantly face. I understand. I've been on your side of the house. I understand the budget process, and it's not easy. But, you know, I hope you also understand where I come from as I plead to you this afternoon. So if you have any questions, Senators, I'd be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Senator, did you participate in the preparation of the 9+3 from your department?
You know, I'm really surprised when I saw that because I tell you right now, based upon our actuals, we're hurting. We're hurting. So that's why when I was talking to Bill back there and I said, Bill, where'd those numbers come from? Because, you know, they're new to me.
Because we're working from what was reported to us from
Right.
each of the departments through BBMR. And the numbers that we got show that of the 27 million that we appropriated for you this year, they're reporting that you're not going to spend 1.7.
I think BBMR could probably explain it because...
But we're showing that it could possibly be as high as 3.8.
Speaker, maybe we all need to sit down and discuss the numbers because I tell you, when I go with my ASO and we're having to do budget modifications to move money around because of shortfalls in one category to the other, I mean, you know, I think we need to come to an agreement on this because obviously, as I said, I was quite surprised myself with those numbers because in actuality, I don't see a surplus coming out of DOC for this fiscal year. And then we also have to remember too, with our pharmacy, our medical clinic, a good portion of it last year was funded through DOI Compact Impact funds. So now those funds have since been exhausted, and so now we have to take it out of the general fund to pay DOC, GMH.
Okay. No, I'm just saying, when we saw the 9+3, which we hadn't seen in the past,
and I think
we're showing that their report shows that you're going to be not spending 1.7, and our projections as we went through it showed that there's a possibility there could be as much as 3.9 unspent from this year's appropriation levels.
Okay, so
that would cover all the 3.5 that you're asking for, which means everything that you wanted was already there. You just needed the cash from somewhere else that wasn't us. The appropriation level was provided from us. You just need to get the cash.
well, if there's money somewhere to be had, I mean, I'll go look for it, but, you know, based on the books that I'm looking at DOC, again, we'll work with BBMR and see where the funding levels are.
Thank you. Chief?
Huffaday, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to speak, but I would like to refer to my director, and then I'll reserve my own comments for right after he's done. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and all your colleagues up here. I just wanted to, to mention that, as we speak here today, our guys are up there right now manning the borders. And right now, we're manning the borders with, we're talking about almost 60% decrease in manpower from, during the 1990s. Today, we're seeing challenging amount of contraband coming through the borders. Our officers are doing their best to seize all these drugs. But as my counterpart here from DOC would always give me a call, Mr. Jim, can we get our K9 dogs to come to DOC to do some sweeps? DOE for the past 6 months has been contacting us to have our dogs go over there and do sweeps. The scary thing about this is that every sweep that's being conducted at DOE, there's always a hit. Either 3 or 4 people are, there's alerts. This is scary because, that's our most precious commodity is the school children out there. And if the people working around them, are involved in drug trafficking or the usage of dangerous drugs, this is something we need to look at and concentrate on because we know that everything is being imported through the borders. So that's why I come here before you guys to make sure that we're not left status quo or caught, in any way. We need to invest on the borders. You need to give us the tools so that we can counter these culprits that are using smart technology to sneak in drugs, counterfeit currency. You've seen it in the papers. They're being confiscated out there on mom and pop stores. We're still trying to find out where in the heck is it coming from. Sita sti kalebla, ta utod ilunya, mungay dadalak. I come from a law enforcement field. I retired and I have a passion for the borders. And I feel for our brothers and sisters in blues like GPD, doing a good job with the Mandanya task force out there. We're ground zero when it comes to drugs out there. And, I plead to you guys, please give us the tools. Like I told these, my colleagues here in Customs, I said, what happened? What have we done in the past? We didn't do our homework. We need to get smart technology. We need to have advanced manifests. We need to hire more people because we need to protect the public out there. Just take a look at the newspaper. Every time the news, there's always somebody getting arrested. My guys, every day, they come to me, sir, we arrested 3 people, 4 people. So, I plead to you guys, we're ground zero for all contrabands. It will lessen the burden on all these other agencies at DOC, especially the guys in blue here. It's going to be a domino effect if we don't man the borders properly. So that's all I wanted to say here today. We can't afford to have status quo or even to lessen our budget by a couple $100,000. And I agree with Mr. Speaker here. When we were down here years ago, he warned us. Is that all you want to raise your service fee to? And look at it's true, we're suffering today because we didn't pre-plan, we didn't forecast the increase of tourism and visitors, and along with that is increase of contraband. So I'll go ahead and let my new chief here let you guys know about the other challenges and what we can do to better serve our people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director. Congratulations, Chief, on your new promotion.
Thank you, sir. Huffaday, thank you, Mr. Speaker, once again for allowing me the opportunity to provide a little talk coming from me. My name is Vincent S.N. Perez. I am a 28-year career customs officer with Guam Customs and Quarantine. So pretty much I've grown up in the agency. I was a detector dog handler for a few years. I was in internal affairs. I was at the borders. I've seen the challenges. I've seen the frustration that our officers are facing. Not only do they have to deal with the lack of a computerized management information system, but we do all of this, you have to develop a skill. And I'm not really going to talk about all of that because we're here for the budget. But I do want to reemphasize that I do represent the classified service in customs. And as I settle in and I take a look at the budget, right, you're looking at the line item that says $253,821 is actually a small amount in the big scheme of things, or even in the scheme of the budget. And it may not seem like much, but when program areas within our agency are not filled, and you're looking at a 50+% shortfall in our personnel, there's not enough training, not enough resources, no equipment. We can't even get electronic manifests, as the director has said. It just seems to be a little overwhelming. And as I settle into the position, I've been promoted almost about a month already. And so as I settle in, I started taking a look at all the different areas and try to prioritize what needs to happen with the agency. So go back, maybe just yesterday or the day before, you go into the news and you see somebody got arrested for this, arrested for that. If you really take up the underlying reason or what happened, you'll see that there's a tie-in to possibly narcotics. And narcotics like ice is not made here in Guam. You need to buy all the precursors. So what does that tell you? We're hearing that there is at least a kilo per day. The rumor is that there's a kilo per day being brought in. So you mean to tell me there's no market for ice? I think there is. So when you take a look at that in the big scheme of things, there's a market here. And in the old days, when you cut off the head of one, basically the organization for that narcotics smuggling ring died with it. But now we're finding that mom and pop operations are starting to pop up all over the place. And so rather than putting money into the effort after it gets to the border with the Mandania or the strike force or with every other entity, I believe that Guam Customs is one of those entities that, if utilized the right way, if given the proper amount of resources, training, equipment, supplies, personnel, and adequate support, we would kill the snakes that are existing in the community today. So one of the things I like to do is ask, and I know once again the $253,000 may not seem like much, but I ask that you reconsider not just funding that amount, but also allowing Guam Customs to take a look at the legislation, to shore up the legislation, to acquire the necessary operating space that the agency needs to operate to do the functions that it needs to do, address these little shortfalls like the $3, $4, $5 million in rent that we pay annually. There are certain things that of course we may have to live with, but the thing is, I don't believe that we've given the effort enough attention. So I would like to see if we can address some of these issues to give us a little bit more autonomy, to allow us to address the issues of retention and pay, to address the legislation to shore up and articulate the border authority. Because right now it seems like the Guam Customs is not the authority, we're more like a tenant. So I want to flip that around. And so one of the things that we need to do is address our fees, which is through the passenger inspection fee, which is based on what our operations need to operate, so we base it on a cost. And all we're doing is that we're basing our fee on a cost. We don't rely on the general fund per se. Pretty much what we're doing is that any part of our operations is either funded through the airport passenger inspection fee or the freight inspection fee. And there are times when we have to come to the legislature to request for an appropriation to offset the shortfall because we don't make enough in one program area or the other. So like I said, as I settle in, I'm starting to notice these little things, and I'm hoping that before too much longer, I'm able to correct a lot of the deficiencies and address the issues head on and hopefully reduce this scourge of ICE that is impacting not just my family, your family, but the community as a whole. And I remember in the 90s, or actually in the late 80s, I was warned as a detector dog handler by somebody who used to work in Hawaii that said, you got to watch out, Vince. Hawaii's already knee-deep in ice. And we're like, what is ice? Fast forward to today, everybody knows what ice is. As a matter of fact, the price of per ounce is actually gone down to some extent. And we are there with our brothers in blue. We are there with the strike force. We're there with the Mandanya. People don't realize it, or people don't understand that Guam Customs is not a federal, we're not a federal entity like CBP. People look at us and say, you mean tell me you're not Customs and Border Protection? No. We are funded locally at the state level. And so a lot of the times people think that we get paid a lot. We do. What it is that we do our job because we want to make a difference. But we see a lot of times that our officers, when they get the opportunity to get more money working for the federal government for doing practically the same thing, I would be remiss if I said, hey, you know what? You need to go and do that. Heck, I almost left. But I stayed because I felt like I need to serve the people of Guam. And I need to make sure that the people of Guam are protected from this scourge. I mean, if that's the only thing I can do is to protect the people from the ice, I will do it. But I don't want to belabor the point. So what I like to do is just provide written testimony so I can shore up what my testimony is here today. But just to reiterate, I'd like to address, to request the legislature to allow us the measly $253,000, but also to help us increase our funding because we have the mechanism. We don't rely on the general fund, but just give us the opportunity to correct these deficiencies by addressing it through the correction of our fees. Thank you.
Ms. McDonald, unless I'm mistaken, you don't need authority from us to increase your fees. You come back to us to approve it, but to increase it is your responsibility. You come up with this.
Yes, but you know, sometimes the fastest way to get from point A to point B is in a straight line. We are bound by the AAA process. And so one of the things that we find is that one of our shortfalls with the agency is that we do not adjust the fees annually. And technically, if you follow the law, based on our operating costs, every year, somebody's supposed to come to me and say, hey, Vince, you guys are tracking $1 million short. So if I'm $1 million short, I start getting all my group together, and I put out a notice, and I say, hey, Mr. Carrier, Mr. Airport Authority, we are going to look at revisiting the fee, and we're looking at increasing it by 30 cents based on, and remember that this is all just cost recovery. So we accept the responsibility for not being able to regularly and periodically adjust the rates, because what we've been doing in the past...
But please get that straight.
Yes, sir.
That it is not this body that is supposed to authorize you to do it. You do it and you come to us.
Yes, sir.
And then when you come to us, then I tell you, is it high enough?
Yes, sir.
Quit slapping me down and saying no.
Yeah.
Because the last time we went through that, I kept telling you the number that you had before that we're recommending, stay with it, and you guys reduced it. And so I'm just saying,
yes, sir.
You know, as my staff says,
I was not the chief of customs at the time, but
you're fortunate that you're going to live long enough to be proven correct. Yeah. And again, on this one.
But I thank you for pointing that out. And so one of the things I like to just say is that we don't have an entity within the agency that is their sole job is to look at the rate and start doing these things. What we do is we take a bunch of our officers who have some technical knowledge on rudimentary skills with budgeting, and they say, we get them together in a room, and so the institutional knowledge kind of dissipates because their role is not to keep doing that. But we are going to take a look to find out what the mechanisms are and what the support functions that are needed to be able to ensure that every year we do that. And if we can, we'll fix it, then we go a long way to fixing a lot of our issues.
Please.
Thank
and
you.
So that is yours. And then the other issue that you brought up, the being a tenant, Everybody's heard
something-
me hollering and screaming about that,
That's a different war,
you
sir.
should have had, that's executive, that's all on that side of the street. I
Yes, sir.
can't be legislating your
Yes, sir.
leases from here, or
Understood.
the decision to lease. Those were all bad
Yes.
decisions that were made by your predecessors. And please, don't come laying it on our doorstep, because it's not
we're
ours.
trying to fix the internal mechanisms and hopefully address the other issues as they come along, but our biggest thing is our finance. But thank you, sir, I appreciate the input.
Thank you very much. Did anybody want to speak from EPA? I thought I had a name and Walter had signed up, but go ahead. Anybody, if you're going to speak, comes.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Guam Legislature, thank you for this opportunity to come before you to speak a little bit about the Recycling Revolving Fund. I took a look at the budget, and as I understand it, the fund and its pretty much the bulk of the fund will go to the Mayor's Council for operations. Now, I'm not a director. I'm just simply Conchita. I'm just an employee of the Guam EPA. And I just need to understand, perhaps, what it is the legislature would like us to do with respect to some of the duties and responsibilities that the law requires us to perform. And one of the things is the stimulus law. The RRF was tapped by then Senator Rory Respicio to use to provide to recycling facilities to assist in the removal of recyclable materials off island. With the budget as it is right now, there will be no funds to provide as a stimulus. There will be no funds available for the removal of junk vehicles, white goods, and other recyclables. And if that is the decision of the Guam Legislature, then so be it, and change the law so we don't, so Guam EPA is not responsible, and the recycling companies don't come to us and say, here's the law, here's the certifications, here's what you need to pay out. So if you're asking how much do we pay out, now, mind you, we just started paying out since April of 2016 because the law was enacted last year in March. And we estimate between 1.3 to 1.5 million each year. If you don't want us to do that, okay. So change the law, says we don't have to do that. And if you don't want us to try to work on the Beverage Container Recycling Act, because we actually worked on regulations, because we got the OPA on our back saying, you can't spend the RF, you need to come up with a plan, you need to come up with regulations. We did. It was kicked back in January by the legislature because we didn't follow the rules. Okay, we get it. We've been working with legal counsel to get it out. We met, our administrator met with AdLib saying, can you just hold off and not use it? We know how to, we have the projects that we know need to be funded. The Mayor's Council is another one, because they are our grassroots, they're first responders, if you will, with respect to their respective jurisdictions in getting junk vehicles, batteries, waste oil, and metals out of their villages. So we were trying to allocate some funding for that. If that's not going to be done, then let us know, because I know that the Mayor's Council always gets on us and say we're not helping them with their jurisdictions. That's all. That's really what it comes down to. Tell us. There was another thing that I noticed, that they cut out the salary of our one person. Now, mind you, Guam EPA, yeah, they did. Our recycling officer, it was gone. It was not in there. So I know, Mr. Speaker, I was talking to your staff. I said maybe that's an oversight. Okay, maybe we can try to work something out. But mind you, Guam EPA's budget, we're primarily funded through US EPA. We don't have many people on the general fund.
That 400 was left in there for the three of you, or however many of you are on board. And maybe you can assist myself and the OPA in explaining the transfer out of $2.02 million from your recycling fund last fiscal year.
Right, for 2016, I can't. I can only tell, because I don't have the authority to move funds. I can only tell you that by April of 2016, when Senator Respiccio's law came into effect, we had to pay out, and that's a liability that you know, Guam EPA, it doesn't matter. You need to make sure that when a recycling company comes with their manifest, their bill of lading, we are obligated to pay. So that law is still in effect until the regulations are enacted, and we're close. We are close, but if it is the will of this legislature...
Nobody is trying to change the will, the mandate.
Okay.
Just get to us what the 2.02 was spent for, because in the audit, it only reads transfer out.
Okay. I understand. For the 400,000 I believe you asked about, an RFP was announced. It is going through the review process. It's been a long haul because we've had, you know, the Office of the Attorney General's office is working with us. There is a committee, and they're reviewing the proposals. That fund, that amount is encumbered for a contract. That is not going to any salaries at all or any collection programs. It is for the zero waste implementation of the zero waste plan and outreach and education, and the law is very specific that it is to be used for contractual services to a private company.
Okay. No, we just need to get that clarified in the audit of where that was transferred out from and what it was spent for.
Okay.
Because it's just a parentheses, and so if I can get a better report on that audit of what it is, then it'll be reinstated. But right now, it's just showing you're collecting 2.9 and money's going out, but no explanation of what it's for.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
And so we'll address it.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
All right. Anybody else? Anyone have any questions or comments of anybody that's still here? No? No? Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Director Lamarena. I just wanted to go over the 9+3 Excel spreadsheet for that BBMR submitted to this body. And if we look at the remaining 1.756 balance, and you say that you're not sure why that's showing a surplus of 1.756, but if in actuality it does, I am hoping that you will greatly consider to pay out the overtime of 205 officers that at an annual rate you pay 10%. The government pays 10% for this unreceived overtime because of the civil case action that was done back in 2010. So if there is a surplus and if this is right and true, I would like for you to move forward and pay off these overtime officers.
Sure, Senator. You know, since I've been here, I mean, I've paid off almost all our Civil Service Commission debt. I've paid off almost all our
No, I understand, but we're talking about 205 officers.
And I mentioned during our budget hearing that if funding is available, we'll pay it. There's no doubt about it. But
very good.
I just don't see where the money's coming from, to be honest with you.
Okay, well, it shows here that there will be. So if there is by the end of the year, I'd hope you'd consider that. Thank you, sir.
Speaker, I just have a question for Customs. Has there been renegotiation in place to negotiate your rental with the airport? Because I honestly believe you're required by law to be there, and you're paying, what, over $5 million? Or how much are you paying to the airport?
Well, if we're renegotiating, are you aware of anything?
A little bit below 4,800,000.
But are you aware of any negotiation already about to take place?
The reason why, Chief, I'm very concerned is because you're identifying a shortfall. You're required to be at the airport. You're required to be down at the port.
Yes,
you're
sir.
required to pay to be where you need to be to do your jobs. And it's quite obvious that your rental payment is quite high. I think somebody that told me it was like $5 million for airport.
We're hearing that it's one of the highest. I think there was an auditor's report that says that we pay the lion's share.
You pay the lion's share?
So these are things that we can renegotiate, but it actually, if you go back to when the law came out, it did not disallow for the rental, and the rent is considered a cost to the agency. So the agency calculates that into its passenger fee and comes out with a number. One of the things I'd like to reiterate is that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection by law are allowed to operate at the ports of entry at no cost. I have the CFR, but I don't have it right on me right now, but I can provide that later.
Well, maybe, Chief, maybe that's what you may want to present to your oversight chairs, that try to mirror that effect.
Thank you, Thank you, Senator San Agustin. I am very well aware, and we are working together.
Okay, but I'm just throwing that at the Chief, because I haven't heard about it, about you.
Yeah,
we had an informational briefing earlier this year to clarify all these things.
I mean, we want to collaborate and work through these issues, and we'll get there eventually. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for all of you who have testified today. Was wondering if BBMR, I was hoping DOA would be here, but BBMR, if you could also help us. In your testimony, you talked about the revenues and that an upward adjustment is warranted. If you could please just give us a little bit more on that, and then tell me what this Section 2718 fund revenue, you said it was 5.2, but actual collections are only 1 million as of July, so are we over appropriating? I mean, over predicting that one, but you want an upward? Could you explain these two paragraphs, please? Yes. So,
sure. Thank you, Vice Speaker. Going back to my testimony, I began by stating that it is our desire to work with the members of the legislature to first come up with a funding level that we think is appropriate after all the concerns that have been voiced today will address. And I'm sure that this representation is only, a small percentage of governmental operations, because not everybody was here today. So the Speaker, and then I do recognize his desire to be fiscally responsible, as I recognize that is what all of you would like to do. But there are some opportunities, I think, for us to revisit the general fund revenue projections.
Do you believe there's an opportunity to revisit the part, it's my understanding part of the revenues were reduced, the projections were reduced because of the Section 30, a different Section 30 expectation based on the war claims.
Yeah,
Do you have any objection to that reduction?
As a matter of fact, I don't think the ship has proverbially sailed with respect to that, because I know that the Congresswoman is continuing to say that she's going to find the alternate funding source. There was some recent correspondence, and I'm not a lawyer, but I think the Department of Interior's recent correspondence was to basically say, for the record, that's not what I said, Congresswoman. I'm not giving you a literal interpretation of federal law. And so it remains to be seen what it is that we get for Section 30. I will report to this body that we did, I think about 2 weeks ago, a week ago, put in our annual request for Section 30, and that amount that we requested was $78 million. So we're consistent in our belief that we should be getting what it is that's due to us, that the ship hasn't sailed with respect to how the war claims, in my humble opinion, should be paid. I don't disagree that it should be paid, but I just don't think that Section 30 is appropriate. So yes, I think our revenue projection in January was $74 million. We did the prerequisite reconciliation with Department of Revenue Taxation in collaboration with the Department of Interior, and we arrived at a $78 million number. So that's the request. So that is the number we like to stay with.
78 million?
Yes.
Versus the 68 million in the bill currently?
Yeah, and I perfectly understand where, the Speaker stands in that
Do you
position.
think, there's also a provision in this bill, and maybe Mr. Camacho can also help us, Reverend Tax, if the, that says if we receive more than this amount in war claims, in Section 30, so that that amount, whatever the excess amount over 68 million, would go towards tax refunds, the provision for tax refunds. And so would you amend any of that? Do you think that would be 10 million, or maybe 10 million based on your estimates? Mr. Carlson, you may, and then I'll ask.
Yeah, please. Again, we agreed on the on $125 million provision for tax refunds. So we don't disagree on that set aside from the general fund revenues. So we would ask the body to consider, if we think we agreed on $125 million being appropriate, then if the number is above 68 million, then that should go to some of the concerns that are being, raised here with the fact that, we have limited resources.
All right.
So I would think that we should, again, reconvene and discuss these types of provisions, because if we believe we've adequately set aside the $125 million from current year revenues to pay for current year tax refunds, then I think, we can move on, and then maybe look at other general fund revenue sources that are contained in the substitute bill that have some significant differences from what it is that not only was contained in the executive budget request, but as the Speaker was alluding to with respect to GVB, that there are some current reports that substantiate, like the TAF number. Okay. So, we do have tracking mechanisms and
I'm
data.
just, for right now, trying to concentrate on this Section 30 versus tax refunds. So, Mr. Camacho, if you could weigh in on that. The bill proposes that if we receive any more than what's allocated right now for Section 30 revenues, that would go towards the provision of tax refunds. Potentially 10 million if Mr. Carlson's prediction is correct.
Well, basically, first to begin with, the 125 basically is basically sufficient enough basically to cover the provisions for refunds. I think that's something that we talked about with the fiscal policy team. So I think going back to the Section 30, I think what Lester is saying, that we asked for that $78 million. I think the question is really what's really the breaking point, basically, or the 2014, I believe, the threshold, whether it's for the fiscal year or for the or during the fiscal year. I think that's one of the questions that we're really looking at.
So you're also sticking with the 125 in the provision for tax refunds. Is that consistent with your estimated what would be owed for 2016?
Yes, that's basically what we're looking at, 135 million for the
Would that,
provision.
would that be less than was actually paid in the prior 3 years?
Well, I guess when you start comparing what's actually paid and what's actually due for the year, we basically just look at the tax year in itself. For example, we're looking at, for next year, we're looking at tax year 2016. So when we look at, based on tax year, we normally will only be paying out refunds about $138, $140 million every year. It's the carryover of the error returns and suspended returns that makes the difference moving forward. In other words, we normally maintain, an average of 10 million suspended or error returns every year. So it's just like a carryover. It takes years to sometimes basically resolve those issues. So it's just, you build up the errors suspended, it goes up, it goes down, but it's always at an average of like $10 million there.
Do you think that provision in this proposed bill that allocates any extra income from the Section 30 towards provision of tax refunds would speed up the tax refund process?
Basically, I would defer that question to Lester, in other words.
Mr. Carlson, do you have an answer? I mean, we also are just looking at this, right? And so we're just trying to get, I don't know if we're going to be able to sit down again, so I'm trying to get as much information as possible today.
If we had the additional resources to be able to allocate to governmental operations and the additional Section 30, I think we'd be able to cover both bases. That we would fund some of the agreeable shortfalls, and I think there'll be something left over with the upward adjustments, because it's not limited to Section 30.
When do you predict we will know the amount that we will be receiving for Section 30?
It's ordinarily the first or second week of September.
September. What would you recommend we do in the budget if we don't know whether it's higher or lower?
Again, I'd like to talk about, with this group, about other areas of general fund revenue.
All right.
And I think that it would be incumbent on us to go down the line of each one of these revenue sources and have an open, frank discussion with the Speaker and his Office of Finance and Budget on where we might make some good faith and solid projections on general fund revenue.
Did you see the projection for the Healthy Future Fund seems to have increased?
Yes, I did. And again, I have no qualms whatsoever with what the Speaker is utilizing for special fund projections in FY18. Okay. When Mr. DeKnight was here, and the Speaker referred to the special funds report, and I showed it to him. He was, we're good.
So you agree with the special funds projections?
Yes.
And the general fund projections, except for the Section 30 part? It's the TAF that...
No, there's a couple other items that we'd like to be able to sit down and discuss in the general fund category, yes.
Oh, in the general fund, okay.
Yes, yes.
All right, and do either of you have a input as to the biennial versus annual? I know you said you want to talk about 2018 and then 2019, but we're faced with a bill right now that's projecting for 2 years. Are you objecting to a 2-year proposal, or are you in agreement with that?
I think that we have a few hurdles that collectively this body should take into account, as well as some input from, of course, Adelup. I think that if we come to a better consensus on what it is that we're going to be utilizing for 18, and that we can use it as a solid base for 19, then maybe there will be some consensus. But I don't think that, while the planning purposes part, I'm 100% behind that. I think when the speaker was talking about how people would understand, if I remember correctly, the horizon for 19, I thought that was a great analogy. And I think that some of the other concerns that he brought up about all of us collectively being here, like in November, you know, in our respective offices, putting stuff together for submission in January, it takes a lot of effort. It really does take a lot of effort. So to the extent that we can all agree on first being able to get our arms around 18, I don't even think we should even talk about 19. But then again, I do believe that this body is willing to engage in that discussion, and we welcome it.
Mr. Camacho, did you have any input on that?
Please, the fifth.
Just because it is the collections that we are relying on.
Basically, when you look at revenues, and maybe I can just bring this up again, it's really, we're really unsure what the Trump administration wants to do with the tax cut moving forward. You know, if it's going to happen, we're going to be looking at rates that are a lot lower. If you look at the you know, if you're looking at 19, you know, corporate rates are going to be lower. I believe they're looking at reducing it down to as low as 20%. And when you look at the rates right now, they go as high as 39%. So there's going to be some tax effect if we don't do anything on the tax commission, whether we want to delink or not, or do something to, you know, look at the revenues. So that's something that we might have to consider if something goes down because we mirror the Internal Revenue Code. And if there's changes in the rates, those are actually going to affect almost everything, even Section 30, because they're based on withholding tax.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you all for your candid answers. I know me as a first-time senator, I appreciate the opportunity to interact. I think it's important for this process. It's one of the things about an annual versus biannual budget that I prefer, so that we will be guaranteed an interaction and guaranteed that all the agencies will feel accountable, and that we also, you know, can be guaranteed to be apprised of progress, guaranteed to, you know, get our questions answered. And I know that there are many provisions in this proposed budget and prior budgets that have reporting requirements and audit requirements, and I just think that I wish Mr. Songan was still here, because my research came up with very similar results as his, that many of the states have stuck with or went back to annual budgets because of the ability to just really hold people more accountable, the transparency when, you know, there's the process that's in place, that's been in place for many, many years, to just have that conversation, as you say. And so that's the only thing. And particularly, yeah, I feel like that's what I'm doing here, is trying to do that, and I don't want to lessen my ability to do that, or the people of Guam's ability to hear. Sometimes this is the first time they hear these things, is because a senator asked the question, so the public gets to hear it. There's not many, you know, public forums for the different agencies to discuss these things, and it would. So I appreciate that opportunity on an annual basis, at least. I was suggesting to the speaker that we increase that type of opportunity, you know, and when the quarterly reports come in, we get opportunities to discuss especially right after the budget, right? Right after the budget's passed, we're going to know about the Section 30. We're going to know some of the other things that we're kind of guessing at when we pass this budget in August. But thank you again. Thank you all we hear your concerns about your different agencies, and I know we have to also address those. So just want to.
Thank you.
Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much for all of you for being here. You know, I appreciate the discussions we're having and the kind of tone that I see from the administration in reference to at least being able to say, hey, we're here, we're going to work together to try to work this out. The only, you know, I think one thing in my mind that I'm not really seeing clearly is that one is that we have a statutorily set date when we have to pass this budget, which is end of this month, is end of August. And there are unknowns, you know, even before that, you know, and we understand that the Section 30 sometime in September is when we would know, Lester, when the actual amount that we receive. Later on in the year is when we will be able to actually see the tracking, you know, to see what the, you know, what's coming in. And from there, even that there's a provision here that allows the administration to come forward in April. That's after the second quarter, to come in and make that call whether we're going to revise the revenues for 2018 and whether we're going to do anything for 2019, right? And so I guess what is not clear to me is that if we take this budget that we have now, knowing that we have a deadline to pass this budget, which is August, the end of August, is that something we're able to work with? And I hear you, you know, talk about we're going to sit down together, and I like that. I like that kind of that tone that we're going to sit together and make determinations on how to move forward. But we have a timeline that we're up against. So, you know, I don't know when we're going to sit down again. I think a session is scheduled sometime soon, next week, I believe, for this substitute version. And so, you know, where, you know, what's that, you know, I don't know. I think, I mean, that's what I'm thinking. Session is being called for sometime next week. So what happens? Are we able to take this, you know, and say we're going to pass it and come back even before the second quarter ends and make those determinations? Les?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Rodriguez. I had no idea that what we were presented with a week ago would be fast-tracked and heard with maybe just this public hearing and not the opportunity to maybe, you know, work with the committee particularly on fine-tuning some of the provisions that are contained. With respect to the statutory requirement of August 31st, I understand why that was there. I understand that some of the uncertainty with the Section 30 amount, you know, it would be to everybody's benefit to have some clarity, and pushing everything back because we don't, you know, if history holds and Section 30 does come in second week, it really is pushing the process, you know, that much closer to the end of the fiscal year, beginning of the next fiscal year. But that being said, I do think that some of what it is that we have, you know, before us should be, you know, discussed a little bit further. I think, what do we have, about 12 agencies maybe at the most represented, you know, that certainly isn't the majority, and I'm not here to speak on behalf of anybody in particular, other BBMR specifically, yes, but you know, funding requirements for the entirety of the government, certainly, and I just think we need to take some more time to think about what it is that, you know, might be the subject of a legislative session.
Okay, because, you know, my concern is that as we look at this, and I believe, it's my understanding that you all also appreciate the this substitute budget that the Speaker had presented us being conservative, right? Yes. And so that's something that I understand and I hear coming from you. I think which we all agree on. So, really, and you talk about there's some room in the revenue where that's where we need to talk about, right? And see where, and one of it is not knowing until after August 31st, right? Is a Section 30. The other is you say on the business privilege, on GRT. That's another area. Can you explain a little bit more on how and where in the GRT you're looking at? That's where we can take a look at adjusting this number that is reflected here?
Well, a conversation occurred with one of the OFB management persons and myself a little while ago, and we agree that BPT is growing. We just don't agree on how much. We agree there's growth in the government, as evidenced by the substitute bill that's here today. We just don't agree on how much growth. And I think when there was an analogy that was utilized, I think, by the speaker today on a 5% number, and you thought it was more prudent to go with a 1% number. That kind of fiscal responsibility and conservatism, I can appreciate. What I would like to, get you guys comfortable with the fact is, I think we do have the ability to work with an increased amount for appropriation, both from the general fund side and what we've already seen, as evidenced by, I believe our figures show an overall increase in special fund revenues to the tune of about $24 million. That's about right? So, we have Healthy Future Funds, we have TAF, we have these trackings that, we're all very comfortable with, right? And so to the extent that the general fund growth may not be something that immediately is conceded to be at the level of the executive budget request, I just think that, we've only had one opportunity to respond, and this is it. And I think we should just take some time and go line by line on the general fund sources and get comfortable. And committee of the whole, sometimes there's just not that comfort, because really, we're here and you're there, and I mean, we're looking up at you guys, and we're on TV, and it's just a little bit more daunting than it is if we had a round table or if we had some other type of discussion where we could bring out, as I have my staff, the speaker could have his OFB staff. I know his OFB staff. They're very, very professional, very versed individuals. And I think that the process would benefit from that, because I think as policymakers and as department heads, we have, our marching orders, our goals, and our desires. But there needs to be, interwoven with all of that, the big global view. And if we can get there collectively, that's where I suggest what we do. So BPT, we're going to disagree, but there are other levels of, that I think really warrant discussion.
That's all. Just one. The one that really interests me is when I saw the presentation from OFB, at least for me, and you're right, you have very good people there. And so the one that really interests me is the 9+3 report. That's where I know that Mr. Taitanfong has said that that's something that needs to be refined further, right? And so how soon can we get a much more refined reporting on that 9+3 report?
As you know, again, I think my staff and the OFB staff, we can get together very, very soon so that, when we have something that's put up on the screen and there are numbers about the little footnotes and the other explanations that Mr. Taitanfong was able to provide. And then, similarly with Director Lamarena, former Senator Lamarena, there are some projections that maybe, over time, maybe as of today, is projecting to lapse. But in the overall thing, the scheme, after we do some more transfers, maybe those lapses will start to dissipate. Mm-hmm. So these are the kind of things where as we see this, and then we look at departmental activities, therein lies the footnotes that we'd like to bring to your attention, so that you don't just gravitate, to this $9 million number, because there are some areas, specific to each agency that we should probably, discuss, and not just utilize that as a single source of information for what it is that you are, receiving as far as a rollover budget.
Okay. That's all I have for you, Les. Just one thing for the OPA. And when we did speak with the OPA about the level of what this substitute version is calling for, which is the rollover, right, which is 1.3, but your actual is about 1.5. And the way you're able to accommodate that for this fiscal year and the fiscal year before was that you're able to use the lapses,
yes,
right? And so
yes,
with this substitute version, that's a practice that's ending. We heard the university speak about wanting to have that as well. But is that something that if you were able to carry over, was that something that the OPA will be able to live with?
Yes, we've always asked for lapses in our budget requests. We didn't get it last year, so yes, that would definitely help, absolutely.
And so it'll help you to be able to cover what is needed for 18?
Yes. We have some operational lapses from FY16 that will cover for this year. It's just FY18 and 19 that we're not too sure how we're going to cover those lapses, those shortfalls.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Hichinova, unlike the court and the legislature, or maybe you are like the court and the legislature, when he releases the money and you get, when BBMR releases the allotment, do you get the actual cash at the OPAs?
We get operational allotment, yes, from DOA directly.
But do you guys keep your own separate checking account, or
Yes,
is everything?
we do.
And so there is actual money, cash in your checking account
Yes.
separate from, so if we were to give you continuing, it wouldn't be pulling on 18 cash. Like the rest of the departments, it's all in general fund. You guys have a completely separate
Checking account,
or
yes.
does the, and your checks are written by the Bureau of Department of Administration.
We
And is
write
it
our
on your
own
check?
checks. So we pay our own bills. DOA gives us the monthly allotments, and then we deposit it into our account, and then we pay our own bills.
Okay, so you have an amount there that you can use.
That
Okay.
we'd like to use, yes.
The other thing is, was there a new GASB rule that was implemented this last year on the reporting of income tax?
The abatement
Well,
disclosure?
yeah, in 15, you just had income tax, and it just had a whole number running across. This year, you broke it down into three, individual, corporate, and withholding.
I believe.
Is there a new rule that requires
Not a
that?
new rule, but just the preference of how DOA would want to present it. So we also had in there the tax, the provision for tax refunds was also deducted and not netted, just to be more transparent.
And so that the listening audience understands, if they were to ever go on the website and look at the audit, there's a huge deficit or in the individual income tax.
Yes.
But if you take the variance that you have at the end there and add it on to your provision, it would be almost equal to the ACTC, the 20 million that they're getting in ACTC in, an ACTC refund. If added to the 125, would get to the 145, which is sufficient to pay for all the taxes.
I need to look at the numbers, but yeah, I know where you're coming from, yeah.
That individual includes the ACTC, but it doesn't include the refund to you, to the government of Guam. So that's where the additional amount is coming from, how they're able to make that payment. Because if you look at it, it's drastic. drop, and so is our report. I mean, our recommendation is substantially lower than the governor's request, but it's because we're now using your reporting requirement of how much is actual individual income tax, and letting the ACTC be in the provision.
Right.
So, anyway, thank you, everybody, and I think, Senator Espaldon, go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Chetchanova, again, just to make clear, the speaker was just asking about, you had mentioned that if there was language in this budget bill to allow you to use your lapses, that would help see you through next fiscal year.
Yes.
And so the line of questioning that the chairman and the speaker was going down is that the lapses are actually real cash, and you said yes. I just want to make that very clear, just to try to understand that.
For this year and for FY18, yes. We're mostly concerned with FY19, that we really won't have enough. Okay. But we do have some operational lapses that we would like to use to cover this year and
it's
next
actual
year.
Cash in the bank in your own account?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing, and more of a generalized question, that the public auditor herself stated that what the government really needs to do, I think it was a two-prong approach, and one of the prongs was to reduce spending. Now, can you cite areas in which you could recommend that this government can look at and where we could reduce spending? I mean, after hearing all the testimony from the agencies themselves and the needs and the growing needs going forward, right, how can we as legislators reconcile the two concepts? On one hand, the agencies on the front lines really have needs. You just heard customs and quarantines, they're operating at 50% below what they really require. You hear from the Department of Public Safety, the police department, they have growing needs, as well as Department of Corrections, and I'm sure all the agencies who are requesting for a little bit more, right, have a justifiable need. And so I guess I'd come back to the OPA then to say, well then how or where should we look to cut down and reduce our spending?
I think when we say to cut back on spending, we mean generally over the government in general. When we look at the different agencies here that have been expressing their concerns about needing more money to do things, that's where our office, we do audits to look at efficiency and effectiveness. Perhaps there's some operational issues within the different agencies where they can probably be more efficient in their management of how they do things, or they could be doing things that are not necessary that may be costing money. So we really have to take a look at the individual agencies, and part of doing that, one of our goals is to do these types of audits, but we need the people to also, we need our staff auditors to be, we need the capacity, we need the training, which we do. We have the training, it's just really the bodies in the office that we need so we can do more of these types of audits to identify those areas where we can be more efficient in our operations.
Okay, and I appreciate that answer, because this body, this branch of government constantly gets under attack, right, for not reducing spending. And I'm just trying to figure out, well then, knowing what we hear from the various agencies and their needs, it's like, well, what are we cutting? How can we cut when their needs are growing? Yeah. And so if you're now talking about it's more of an in-house efficiency issue, this isn't really something we can legislate. It's more something internal that maybe your office or the Office of the Public Auditor can assist the various agencies to try to identify where those efficiencies can be met. But it's not necessarily that can be passed by a statute.
Yeah, it's our mandate actually to look at, to do audits on efficiency. So it's well within our means.
Well, and I just wanted to make that, at least say it and articulate that, because like I said, there's a lot of people who think out in the public who think that all we have to do is pass a law and that's what's going to happen, when really the real mechanism to reduce our spending is really internal to the agencies, and with the assistance of perhaps the public auditor and others who might be able to assist. But it's not something that we can pass into law and say, well, let's cut them all by 10%, 20% over there, and then we all of a sudden are operating at $100 million less, because we know from the testimony that that may not be the practical solution. Is that a fair statement?
But we also want to emphasize that agencies shouldn't depend on the auditor to come and do that work for them. As much as possible, we want like the management of these agencies to be responsible for the efficiencies of their departments as well. We come in, usually audits are after the fact type of things that happen where we can look on things that have already happened, but if management would take a more proactive role and immediately start identifying maybe areas that they could be inefficient at through a study, or maybe having assigned somebody in their departments to really look at their operations because they understand it the best.
Right. And I appreciate that answer as well. I understand that because it is upon the management level to take a look at their own operations and say, how can I run this a lot more efficiently, a lot more, and still remain effective, if not more effective in what we do. But I just wanted to enter into this little bit of a conversation because, like I said, there's constant pressure on this body, right, to reduce spending. But if the spending is really in the efficiency of the agency, then it's incumbent upon the agency and all the agencies to look within themselves to try to understand that.
Yes.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I believe so.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I will thank all of you and for coming this afternoon and providing testimony. We stand adjourned.